The water was colder than it should have been for spring, and it bit through her fingers as if it recognized her touch. She had been kneeling there since before dawn, sleeves rolled, spine bent, scrubbing linen that would never remember her name. Easter bells carried faintly from the hill, each chime a promise meant for someone else. The river did not ring. It waited. They said the household must be spotless by Sunday. White sheets, white gowns, white souls. She worked until her knuckles split, the blood dissolving quickly in the current, leaving no trace. Nothing ever stayed in the water for long. It took, and it carried away. The children liked to watch her work. They stood on the bank in their stiff shoes, faces pink from the cold, asking questions she was not meant to answer. Why must clothes be beaten before they were clean? Why did the river smell different some days? Why did everyone say Easter washed sins away, if the same people always returned unchanged? She never looked at them when they spoke. Looking made things dangerous. By mid-morning the house swelled with prayer and perfume. The mistress passed by without seeing her, skirts lifted from the mud, murmuring about purity. Inside, hands were folded, heads bowed, guilt redistributed like bread. Outside, the river thickened, darkened, as if the earth itself had decided to remember. She rose at last, joints aching, and wrung out the final sheet. The water ran clear. Clear enough to reflect the sky, clear enough to hold a face beneath it. When the bells rang again, louder now, she felt something loosen inside her. Not rage, not mercy, but a certainty as clean and final as stone. The children's laughter drifted closer to the bank, light and careless. She dried her hands on her apron and turned toward them, the river shifting at her back, patient as confession. The laundress's understanding of Easter water does not arrive as revelation, but as accumulation, a slow stitching together of half-heard beliefs, gestures, and contradictions that have surrounded her since childhood. She learns not from books or sermons, but from the rhythms of labor and the quiet superstitions that servants pass between themselves when they believe no one of importance is listening. Water to them is never neutral. It remembers hands. It absorbs intention. On ordinary days it cleans what is soiled, but on holy days it becomes something closer to a witness. The elders whisper that water drawn or entered on Easter morning is different, sharpened by prayer and expectation, capable of taking more than dirt from cloth or skin. At the estate, this belief is never spoken aloud by those in power, yet it governs everything they do. The master demands more washing than usual, more bleaching, more perfection, as if cleanliness itself might stand in for repentance. The mistress speaks obsessively of purity, while avoiding the river entirely, insisting the laundress work closer to the banks than ever before. In church, the priest proclaims forgiveness as freely given, but the laundress notices how the same men who bow their heads most deeply leave with their boots unremoved, their hands unwashed. The water is expected to absolve without ever being allowed to judge. As she works, she begins to sense a tension in the river on Easter week, a heaviness that feels deliberate. When she submerges stained linen, the current seems to tug harder, pulling at fabric and fingers alike. Old women among the servants murmur that Easter water is meant to carry sins away from the living, not merely rinse them until they look clean. One recalls a story of a village where a murderer was forced to wash at dawn on Easter and never returned, his guilt taken downstream where no one could retrieve it. Another insists the river chooses what it will accept, that it rejects false offerings. What unsettles the laundress most is the realization that the household's idea of cleansing requires a sacrifice that is never acknowledged. The water is given blame for accidents, for drownings, for disappearances, while the people who benefit from its supposed holiness remain untouched by consequence. She begins to see Easter not as a celebration, but as a transaction, one where sins must be placed somewhere else to keep order intact. Standing knee deep in the cold current, scrubbing garments meant for prayer, she understands that the river has always been asked to do the work that people refuse to do themselves, and that on this day, above all others, it is expected to take whatever is offered without question. The realization does not arrive as hatred toward the children, nor even as fear, but as a quiet clarity that settles while she watches them move through the house and grounds, as if the world were already arranged for their benefit. They are gentle enough now, still capable of kindness, still curious rather than cruel, yet everywhere around them are rehearsals of power. She sees it in the way servants step aside without being asked, in how small hands are corrected only softly while harsher discipline is reserved for those who serve. The children absorb these lessons without effort, the same way cloth absorbs water, and she understands that innocence is not protection, but preparation. She begins to notice how often the Master speaks of legacy in their presence, how punishment is framed as necessity and mercy as weakness. Stories told at the table praise conquest, obedience, order. The children repeat these words later, not knowing what they mean, only that they are meant to mean something. When they play, they imitate what they see. One commands, the other obeys. One spills water and demands it be cleaned, laughing as the task is repeated again and again. It is not malice, she tells herself, only learning. But learning has weight, and weight becomes momentum. The laundress recognizes something familiar in this process, because she has lived its conclusion. She remembers being small enough to believe rules were natural, that some people were born to kneel, and others to be carried across mud, so their shoes would remain clean. She knows how quickly lessons harden once they are rewarded. The children are praised for authority, not questioned for it. Their mistakes are softened by explanation, their harm dismissed as play. Already, their futures are being rinsed of responsibility before stains can even be named. What troubles her most is how the household speaks of sin around them. The Master's failures are reframed as burdens he carries for the sake of his family. His anger is called strength, his control called discipline. The children listen, nodding, learning which acts require confession and which are simply inherited rights. She realizes that by the time they are grown, their cruelty will not feel like cruelty at all, but order, custom, entitlement made invisible by repetition. Standing by the river, she understands that innocence does not stop harm, it delays it, giving it time to justify itself. The children will not need to be taught to be cruel. They will only need to be taught that cruelty is necessary. In that moment, she sees them not as they are, but as they are being shaped to become, vessels already being filled with excuses, already being prepared to carry forward the same violences that have soaked into the soil beneath the estate. And she understands that whatever the river takes on Easter, it will be claimed as cleansing, not loss, because the world they inherit depends on calling inevitability anything but choice. The moment does not arrive with shouting or spectacle, but with the small, practiced cruelty that passes for order in the house. The mistress calls her inside while the linens are still dripping, irritation sharp in her voice, eyes fixed on the dampness spreading across the stone floor. She speaks of standards of holiness, of how nothing clean should ever touch something that has been lowered into common water. Her gaze lingers on the laundress's hands, red and cracked, as if they themselves are a contamination. The humiliation is deliberate, careful, meant to instruct rather than punish. She is ordered to rewash what is already clean, to begin again. because the mistress believes the river has not done enough, because obedience must be visible. When the laundress hesitates, only for a breath, the mistress steps closer and takes hold of her wrist, lifting it so the others in the room can see the raw skin, the swelling joints. She does not raise her voice. She does not need to. She speaks softly about discipline, about how dirt returns when vigilance weakens, about how some people require more correction than others. The children are there. They stand near the doorway, silent, watching. The mistress does not send them away. Instead, she draws them closer, placing a hand on one child's shoulder as she explains that cleanliness is a moral duty, that neglect invites rot, that certain bodies are more prone to it. The lesson is framed as care, as guidance. The laundress understands, then, that this is not about the linen or the floor or even her labor, but about demonstrating where power settles and how it is justified. As the mistress releases her wrist, the laundress feels something shift. The language of purity has always hovered around her work, but now it reveals its true function. Cleanliness is not meant to restore. It is meant to control. The washing is endless because absolution is never intended. No matter how white the cloth becomes, it will always be suspected of hidden stain, just as her body will always be suspected of carrying something that needs correction. The children's eyes follow her as she kneels again. She can see curiosity there, not discomfort. They are learning how shame is administered, how righteousness can be worn like perfume to mask cruelty. The mistress smiles at them, satisfied, and the laundress understands that this is how violence is made respectable, how it is passed on gently, wrapped in language about goodness and order, and how being made clean can be more brutal than being struck, because it teaches the victim to doubt their own worth, their own limits, their own humanity, and she knows that whatever she thought washing was meant to do, it has never been about removal of dirt, but about teaching who must kneel and who will always stand dry. The river begins to intrude on her sleep after the humiliation, slipping into her dreams without warning, without narrative, appearing the way memory does. When it has decided not to ask permission, it is never violent at first. In these visions it is still, widened, its surface smooth enough to resemble glass. She dreams of standing at its edge, unable to see her reflection. Only depth, an opening that suggests invitation rather than threat. The water does not pull. It waits, and that waiting feels intentional, as if it knows time belongs to it. She wakes with the sensation of dampness on her hands, though the bed is dry. During the day, she finds herself listening for the river, even when she is indoors, hearing its low movement beneath the sounds of the house. On holy days, servants avoid speaking of it, but now even their silences seem to echo its presence. One woman crosses herself when passing the bank. Another refuses to draw water after dusk. The laundress begins to understand that fear and reverence have always been intertwined there, mistaken for one another until no one remembers the difference. In the dreams, the river speaks without words. It opens, not like a mouth that devours, but like a confession that receives. She sees objects lowered into its shoes, coins, scraps of cloth, each sinking without resistance, taken without judgment. When she leans closer, she feels relief rather than dread, a loosening in her chest that she has never associated with mercy before. The river does not promise forgiveness. It promises removal. What disturbs her is how clearly the dreams distinguish between accident and offering. When something falls into the water unintentionally, the current rejects it, pushing it back to shore. But when something is placed there deliberately, with weight and intent, it disappears. She wakes from these dreams with the sense that the river has rules older than prayer, older than property, and that those rules are not concerned with innocence but with balance. During waking hours, the river appears altered. Its color deepens, its surface tightening as if holding breath. The laundress notices how the master avoids looking at it, how the children are warned away with sudden sharpness rather than explanation. She recalls stories of drownings, spoken of as misfortune, as God's will, yet always followed by relief, by the sense that something unresolved has been settled without effort. In her dreams on the nights leading to Easter, the river widens further, becoming almost human in its patience. It does not command her. It does not accuse. It simply opens itself, an answer to a question she has not yet allowed herself to ask, offering not cleansing in the way the house understands it, but an ending that does not require forgiveness, only the courage to place something within it and let it be taken where no one can retrieve it. Easter Sunday unfolds with the careful choreography the household expects, every movement rehearsed to suggest harmony and renewal. The bells begin early, their sound carrying across the fields and into the servants' quarters, summoning bodies as much as souls. The laundress moves through her tasks quietly, aware of how attention has shifted away from the edges of the estate and toward the chapel, where forgiveness is being spoken aloud and received without interruption. The river is left unguarded, its bank empty for the first time in days, as if even fear has chosen to attend the service. The children are restless in their formal clothes, tugging at collars, whispering complaints meant to be hushed. They are promised freedom afterward, a walk, fresh air, a brief escape from stillness. The laundress hears this in passing, not as permission but as opportunity. She notices how no one questions where the children will go once the prayers end, how the assumption of safety follows them like a shadow. They are expected to remain untouched by harm simply because harm has always moved around them. As the final hymn swells and voices rise together, the doors of the chapel open, releasing the congregation in a flood of relieved movement. Greetings are exchanged, hands clasped, obligations fulfilled. In the confusion of sound and color, the children slip away with the ease of those who have never been restrained. The laundress watches from a distance, not calling out, not intervening, her stillness mistaken for obedience. She follows at a measured pace, far enough to avoid notice, close enough to remain certain. The path to the river is softened by recent rain, footprints blending quickly into one another. The air smells of damp earth and blossoms, a sweetness that feels almost mocking in its generosity. The children chatter as they walk, their laughter light, unconcerned, unburdened by the weight that has settled so heavily elsewhere. They do not sense the quiet that surrounds the water, the way even birds seem to pause as they approach the bank. When they reach the river, they stop, gazing at its surface as if seeing it for the first time. It looks calm, harmless, reflecting the pale sky without distortion. The laundress stands behind them, her presence barely registered, another fixture of their world, familiar enough to be invisible. The bells ring again in the distance, faint now, their meaning dissolving into sound alone. In that moment, there is no struggle yet, no sudden violence, only the convergence of ritual and neglect, of faith practiced loudly elsewhere and silence allowed here, and the river receives them, as it has received so many unspoken offerings before, unnoticed, unquestioned, carrying forward the consequences of prayers that ended too soon. The aftermath unfolds, not with chaos, but with an unsettling calm that confuses those who arrive too late. Shouts rise from the riverbank once the absence is noticed, voices breaking as names are called into water that does not answer. Men run, women clutch at one another, explanations forming before facts have settled. The children are found tangled in reeds downstream, their small bodies arranged by the current in a way that suggests accident rather than intention. The word tragedy is spoken quickly, eagerly, because it requires no further examination. Tragedy belongs to God, not to people. The master rages in a way that feels performative, grief sharpened into anger, so no one mistakes it for responsibility. The mistress collapses into shrill weeping, surrounded immediately, protected from silence. The priest murmurs about mysterious ways, about trials sent to test faith, about innocence returned to heaven. Each phrase seals the event away from human cause. The river is blamed, as it always is, accused of hunger, of deceit, of swelling without warning, even though it has not changed its course in years. Through all of this, the laundress does not move from her place at the wash basin. She returns to her work as if summoned by habit rather than command, kneeling with the same posture she has held since dawn. When questioned, she answers plainly. Yes, she saw the children earlier. No, she did not hear them cry out. No, she did not think they were in danger. Her voice does not tremble. There is nothing in it to correct. This refusal to flee unsettles those around her more than panic would have. A guilty person is expected to run, to hide, to fracture under scrutiny. Her stillness resists interpretation. Some servants avoid her eyes. Others watch with a mixture of awe and fear, sensing that something irreversible has occurred without the usual signs. The master considers punishment, then hesitates, aware that any accusation would require explanation, and explanation might lead somewhere inconvenient. As evening falls, the estate grows quiet in the way it does after ceremonies end, after grief has been properly displayed. The river resumes its ordinary sound, indistinguishable from any other day. The laundress scrubs steadily, hands raw, water lapping against stone. She does not pray. She does not weep. She understands that what has happened will be absorbed into routine, categorized, absolved by repetition. The children will become a story about misfortune, the river a cautionary tale, Easter a day forever tinged with sorrow, but never with accountability. When she wrings out the final cloth and lays it aside, the water runs clear again, carrying with it what it has been asked to take, leaving behind a surface clean enough for everyone else to accept, and she remains where she is, present, unrepentant. As the household begins the long work of forgetting what it has already decided not to name,